In the mid-18th century, the American colonies were thriving, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Frustration with British rule was growing, and the cries for independence were about to be heard across the Atlantic. What began as a fight over taxes and governance would soon erupt into one of the most significant revolutions in history, changing the course of the modern world forever. For decades, the American colonies had been under British control, with laws and regulations imposed from across the ocean. But as the British Empire struggled to recover from the financial burden of wars in Europe, particularly the costly 7 Years' War, it began to impose even stricter policies on the colonies. One of the most unpopular acts was the Stamp Act of 1765, which taxed printed materials in the colonies. This tax, though relatively small, ignited outrage. Colonists had no representation in Parliament, and they believed it was unjust for them to be taxed without a voice in how that money would be used. Leaders like Samuel Adams in Massachusetts and Patrick Henry in Virginia were quick to respond, rallying the colonists with cries of "No taxation without representation." These protests grew louder, and soon the colonies were united in their discontent with British rule. By 1775, tensions had reached a boiling point. British troops were stationed in Boston, and colonial militias were beginning to arm themselves in response. On April 19, 1775, the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, marking the beginning of open conflict between the colonists and the British. The skirmishes at Lexington and Concord were just the beginning. The battle for freedom quickly escalated. On June 17, 1775, the Americans would face the British in the Battle of Bunker Hill, a costly confrontation that showed both sides were in for a long and bloody fight. The colonists had no formal army, no resources, and no guarantee of success. Yet, they were united by the desire for freedom. In the Continental Congress, colonial leaders like George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson began to discuss the possibility of full-scale independence from Britain. By the summer of 1776, the situation had become dire. The colonies had been in open rebellion for over a year, and there was no turning back. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, formally breaking ties with Britain and declaring the colonies as free and independent states. The document, drafted by Thomas Jefferson and influenced by Enlightenment ideas, outlined the colonists' grievances with the British Crown and their right to self-determination. It was a radical, daring move, and the signers knew it. They were committing treason in the eyes of the British Empire. The British response was swift and severe. King George III declared the colonies to be in open rebellion, and the war between the British Empire and the American colonists would intensify. The war itself would be long and arduous. Early on, the colonists were at a disadvantage. The British Army was far superior in terms of resources, training, and experience. But the Americans were resourceful. They fought with guerrilla tactics, and key battles like the Siege of Boston, the Battle of Saratoga, and the victory at Yorktown would prove crucial in shifting the momentum. The winter at Valley Forge in 1777–78 tested the resolve of Washington and his men. With supplies running low, many soldiers were sick, starving, and frozen. But the American forces, bolstered by French military aid and the training of Baron von Steuben, emerged stronger than ever. The turning point came in 1777 at the Battle of Saratoga. The American victory convinced France to formally ally with the revolutionaries, providing much-needed troops, naval support, and resources that would ultimately tilt the war in favor of the colonists. The American Revolution was not just a war of colonists fighting against British tyranny. It became a global conflict. France, eager to weaken Britain, became a crucial ally, sending troops, supplies, and naval support. Spain and the Dutch Republic also provided aid in various ways, turning the revolution into an international struggle. By 1781, the British were exhausted. The decisive Battle of Yorktown in Virginia sealed the fate of the British forces. With help from French troops and naval power, American and French forces surrounded General Cornwallis, forcing his surrender and effectively ending the war. With the British defeat at Yorktown, negotiations began in Paris. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, formally ended the war. Britain recognized the independence of the United States, and the new nation was born, stretching from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. But the struggle wasn't over. The newly formed United States faced the challenge of building a new government, one that would uphold democratic principles and prevent tyranny. In 1787, the U.S. Constitution would be drafted, laying the foundation for the new nation's system of government. The American Revolution not only created a new nation but also inspired movements for freedom and self-determination around the world. It showed that a people could rise against oppression and fight for their right to self-governance. The ideas of liberty, equality, and democracy that emerged from the revolution continue to shape the United States and the world to this day. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more incredible stories from the past.